Maybe we can start off a little bit and just kind of start with some introductions, and folks can let everybody know where they're coming in with and what their background is. I'm Aaron. I don't have any credentials. I'm a parent. I've been teaching OWL for a while. That's my claim to fame, and really grateful to have such a wonderful panel of really outstanding people to help guide us in these difficult times, or at least we can all guide each other. So with that, who would like to go introduce themselves next?
I can go. Hi, everyone. I'm Cammie McBride. I'm a clinical child psychologist, and my day job is a professor at Roosevelt University. I'm also an OWL facilitator and a parent of 2 college-age kids. So happy to have this discussion.
And I think also for disclaimer benefit, I will just add that we are not officially representing any organization, including
Right.
OWL or our employers or anyone we work for or represent or contract with, or we're just being opinionated for our own.
My comments are my own. Thanks, Aaron.
It's not legal, medical, or any other kind of advice, so take it with all the grains of all the salts.
Right. I'm gonna popcorn it over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Cammie. Hi, I'm Stephanie Kiesling. I am a licensed clinical social worker, and currently I work as a field consultant at the University of Chicago's Crown School of Social Work as working with first-year MSW students. Prior to that, I worked as a clinical supervisor in youth crisis intervention hotline work. So I'm also been an OWL facilitator for most of my life, I think. And I'm happy to be here. I hope I can help. Thanks. I will popcorn to Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie Burwell. I am an OWL facilitator and have facilitated with several of these wonderful people with the 8th grade program. I'm also a 9th grade OPRF parent. And have a background in secondary teaching and learning. So I spent most of the first half of my career working with 7th, 8th, and 9th graders who I think are made of magic. And I know that they can be tricky. So I think, Carrie, are you next?
I think I am. So I'll share that Aaron said they have no credentials. I have a new credential. I like to say all of my letters now. I've launched into my second career as an LBS 1, so I'm a special education teacher. I've thrown my hat in the ring, and I'm teaching in CPS in a self-contained classroom. Super passionate about disability justice, among other things, and recently learned that reading comprehension literacy is my jam. So I'm hoping to add that lens to this panel. And I'm also a mama to a 9th grader at OPRF as well. Is there anyone else we need to popcorn to?
I was just going to add, I forgot to say that I actually do have 2 children that are in their early 20s. So I've been through all the OWL and all the schools, and they went to school here in Oak Park.
Wonderful. And I'm also going to add, Sheila Raja couldn't make it tonight. Her mom passed away. So yeah, send in our condolences to her. Also added her website in there as well. She's written a couple of books, especially around teens and trauma, and those are good resources as well. And maybe we should just kick off a little bit and kind of just start with, when we hear kids talking, well, actually, let me back up a little bit, because one of the things that's kind of become clear even since we threw this out there is that a lot of kids are already having these conversations, and parents don't necessarily realize that their kids are already talking about it at school. So when we bring this up, or when we want to talk about it, or we're hearing them talk about it, what do y'all feel is kind of the emotional stance that parents should take, or kind of the tones to set? How do we go about that?
Well, this was one of my favorite questions that you talked about chatting with, and so I can kick it off, and hopefully what I say resonates, and anyone who wants to jump in, please do. When I think about talking about really challenging topics, particularly ones that we as adults know are nuanced and maybe a little chaotic, and we have complicated feelings about, I really think the first emotion to try to channel as an adult is to let your kid know that they are safe with you, and to kind of take a non-judgmental stance, because when I can get to that place of safety, even about really difficult topics, my kid will open up and share all kinds of things with me. So I think kind of letting your kid know that you're open and you can handle it and be safe in yourself is the starting point. And I say this as an anxious person who's perpetually anxious about the state of the world. So if I can do it, I feel good that everyone can.
I agree with Carrie. I think it's important to sort of be supportive of your kids' curiosity about the world. Like, this is sort of part of who they're becoming. So not to punish that curiosity out of a sense of wanting to protect them and being afraid for what they might encounter, but to be open and receptive to what they want to talk to you about. And sort of, you're also being curious about what they understand, what they know. They might surprise you in terms of information they share or questions they have. So yeah, sharing that sense of it's okay for them to ask you, that you're really the best person for them to ask these important questions.
And I think I'd add, I think I often want to have the right answer right away. Like, here, I've served it up on a platter for you. But I've found if I can resist my need to be a know-it-all and kind of start with a couple of foundational questions back. Hey, where did you hear that? How did you feel when you heard that? You know, are you just letting me know that you know, or do you have some questions you want to ask, so that you can kind of test out what they're trying to tell you? Are they trying to shock you because they've had a long day? Are they really worried about something? So kind of trying to create kind of a common framework that they're starting from, and trying to decide, like, to the point of, like, how are they feeling about it? Is it something that they're grossed out about, something that they're nervous about, something that they think their friends are kind of full of BS and they're just kind of pressure testing it with you? So kind of taking a pause and asking some follow-up questions before you dive in.
I agree with all of that. Try to be calm, try to be honest, answer the question they ask. Don't give too much information. Ask them how they feel. My favorite question, how does that make you feel? And reassure them that they're never, ever going to get in trouble for asking you any question at all, ever. You're their safe space.
Yeah, and I noticed too, this was something that we brought up about, or I kind of mentioned it, like, you know, oh, there's so much news about the Epstein files. And then it was 2 days later, she asked me, like, so what's actually in the Epstein files? And I was like, I just kind of noticed sometimes there's that, like, space with kids where, like, it takes a while to, like, process and register and decide that we do have some questions that we want to bring up. And I tend to be, as people who know me know, I can be a little too direct at times. So I try to back that off. But do we want to kind of address some of the differences in some of those age groups and maturities? You know, for obviously there's going to be really different ways between an 8-year-old and a middle schooler and a high schooler. And then we've all seen in, like, some of those OWL classes too, there can be a wide variety of maturities, even with 8th graders.
Yeah, and I also want to throw out that there's also neurodiversity and different needs of individual kids, which might affect the way that they process some of these topics. So 2 8-year-olds are not going to be maybe even in the same ballpark of development.
Thank you for noting that, Carrie. I think you all know your kids best, so and how they might receive information, but generally, if the younger they are, the you know, you don't have to talk down to them, but the simpler language of you know, some people did not keep other people safe. Now some adults are trying to help fix it. We hope anyway. You don't have to add that part. You know, that you are a safe space and you are here to, if you have questions about it, back to the questions, you can always ask those questions, but to keep it simple and direct, and then ask them if they have any more questions about it. That's what I'd say for the youngest ones. Middle schoolers, I'm going to let you guys handle. Julie, middle school teacher.
I think you kind of hit on the thing I always start with is, to your point, answer the question asked. I think it can be really tempting to be like, this is my chance to instill all of our family values, to explore consent, to talk about accountability at the highest levels of government. And oftentimes it's about like, can I answer this one question to my 7th or 8th grader in part so that I'm not overwhelming them, in part so that I'm not conflating for them, this thing happening here is not necessarily in our house, but we can still talk about both of those things. And I also think it's a really good chance to kind of showcase that you are willing to just show up. I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try my best with the answer. If I don't know something, here's how I'm going to go find better information to kind of model that for them, to showcase how you would go about finding reliable sources. And I think, yeah, just kind of, I think the key is always answering the question that the person is asking you. Because again, I think it opens a door for them to come back and ask you another question.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off of that one thing that I'm always feeling when I'm talking with parents in the community is that I think we're often waiting for our kids to ask us something directly, or maybe underestimating how much things are happening at school. So I also think it's okay to ask your child questions. So we all joked kind of in our pre-panel about like the car ride home. I feel like for middle school and above, it can be really helpful to float out an open-ended question about some of these topics without sharing details, to test the waters and see if what your child is being exposed to, without that judgment. And like Julie was saying, without like rushing to be like the know-it-all who can solve the world's problems, because I'm often very surprised what kids already know. And then I get their perspective and their maturity level on the topic and can then tailor my response to that.
I also think for middle school students, there's a lot of great things going on in the chat. So maybe we can go back to that after, or when we're done with this conversation. But one of the things we talked about as a panel group before we met with you all was that it's a great jumping off point, especially for middle schoolers, maybe even younger. I don't even know, about digital literacy and internet safety, and asking them questions about what they've learned in school and how was that, and what do they know, and don't be annoyed if they roll their eyes at you, and just keep trying. Because I think that to me, it all comes back to that open line of communication and letting them know that I am the person, or you and your spouse or other caregiver person are the people that they should be coming to. And we can talk more about internet safety if people are interested in that. Erin, do you want to?
I was going to address one of the questions in the chat.
Okay.
As we can. There was someone asked, what's a good open-ended question?
Yeah.
And I think, are you guys what are you guys talking about at school in terms of the news, in terms of what's happening with the government? Anybody talking about the Epstein files? I mean, because if your kid knows about it, saying it Epstein files isn't going to like plant the horribleness that is the Epstein files in their brain. But if they have heard rumors about it, or maybe they know more about it, it sort of opens the door, versus what Julie was describing of wanting to sort of quickly impart, what's important to you and your values, finding out what they know by just tossing out some questions out there. And like Stephanie was saying, maybe they will nibble and have the conversation with you, and maybe that they're just not, ready to talk about it or thinking about something else that day.
And I think there's a component of like long-term planning. If you one of the kind of all mantras is like teaching kids sex ed doesn't suddenly make them all go out and become promiscuous sex havers. That, it's about giving them the information they need to become competent people in this world and have good, healthy relationships. And to me, I think it's like we sometimes are worried if I say pedophilia around my kid, then I'm introducing to them the world of all the horrors. But it's more that if they know that you are a place they can go to talk about these things or to ask their questions to, it one lets them know that there's no unsafe topic in your house, so that if you needed to be a resource to them in a more personal matter, a friend is in trouble, they're in trouble, they know that you're there. And it's like, if you aren't their source of truth, like we also say that parents are the best sex educators of their children. If you aren't a source of truth to them, they will find another source of truth. So it's like digging into that bravery of, I don't want to talk about this stuff with anyone, but if I'm not willing to do it with my kids, someone else will, or they will find information elsewhere.
And I'd love to share my personal favorite open-ended conversation. I love to tell the kids that I heard a thing on the mom group online, or that I heard from a mom friend that everyone was talking about this thing. Oh my gosh, what do you think of that? Because it shares a little bit of me, and it lets me be a little bit like vulnerable and lets them educate me. I find that many kids absolutely love to tell their old mom like all the cool things that are happening at school that we don't know about, and it kind of opens the conversation. And I would love to hear from other parents. I see somebody put in the chat their open-ended questions, so I feel like if you have a good one, do share, because there's a lot of ways to have the conversation. So.
And I want to add in there too, because I love that you said that, Carrie, too, because I was just thinking there's one of my favorite games with kids too is to like let them correct me and to purposely give them like incorrect. Like I heard kids aren't really talking about that. And then they actually will share a lot more because they're so eager to correct you. As we know, teenagers love to do that. So like, please, I heard it on the YouTubes. Which YouTubes? Yeah, I know. Yeah. But yeah. And just curious too, because one of those questions got in there as well, and I wanted to throw this back. I think sometimes too, how would we feel about kind of letting kids know that like, hey, I'm really struggling with this, and I heard a lot of other people are too, and I think it makes sense because this is such a really hard topic, and just kind of like almost normalizing that this is legitimately concerning, because I can imagine a lot of the school cafeteria conversations are not resembling a group therapy session, to say the least. So like, how do you feel about kind of creating that space with the kids?
I think that's great. I was gonna go back to to Angela, who said, I don't know how much I should be saying about your own emotional state. And I think you are, kids, especially teenagers, should know that you have your own emotions, and you're allowed to have your own emotions, and you can share them with your children. And it's really great modeling of how people should talk about their emotions. You can talk about how it's been hard for them because it's a difficult topic. I think however much you want to share with them about what you're feeling is great. And then you can turn it around and be like, have you guys heard about this? Do you think, what do you think? Why do you think I'm having this reaction to it? Treat them as the experts, as Erin was saying, get their take on what is going on too. But I think it's okay to share your emotions. Now, don't parentify your children, but sharing and modeling that emotions are difficult is great. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
I'd love to, I agree with everything you said and expand on that. I do think there's a little bit of a developmental gap. I would say like middle schoolers, I'm not a developmental psychologist, just a SPED teacher, but I think middle schoolers and above have some capacity to separate their emotional state from yours.
Right.
For our elementary kids, I probably would not spill a ton of like emotive, overwhelming feelings onto them, because they will often have a tendency, especially if they are neurodiverse, to absorb that as they're the cause or that they're not safe. So I tend to say like you'd want a concrete, explicit feeling. Like, I actually don't know how to answer that question, and it makes me feel kind of frustrated, so I'll look it up later. But I probably wouldn't say like, I'm really scared because the world is full of sex traffickers and our government's not working. It's like probably too much for them. So, and I'm sharing that because I'm a person who has a lot of feelings and have to really go to a concrete example for young kids.
I think for teenagers too. I mean, you just need to kind of like know your kid and your relationship with them as well. But and I don't want to like insult anybody, but absolutely it could easily like go into like you venting or something like that. So you got to be like really, really mindful. That's
Yeah,
actually been my struggle and why I've been kind of like, I don't know how to do this, you know, and I have a 14-year-old, almost 15-year-old son. And it's like, I can't just like not talk about it at all, obviously. So
Yeah, I agree. I did not mean to imply that you should overly emote. But I meant in a appropriate way you can share those emotions. But yeah, Carrie, what you said is spot on. You know your kid, if your kid's neurodiverse, if your kid needs something different, you got to roll with what's appropriate for your child. So yeah, is it Marielle?
Marielle, yeah.
Marielle, it's really hard. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
also think sorry.
I was just going to jump onto something Stephanie said, and then Julie, I'll jump back to you. Sort of the idea of like prepare, like if you want to have a conversation with your child, to like parentify means like, you know, putting them in sort of a position where they have to sort of be almost like an adult in the relationship. Maybe practice with an adult person in your life, right? Like a significant other, a adult family member, a close friend, to have that conversation and sort of process some of those feelings so that when you do then go talk to your kids, you sort of work through some of the things that you're feeling. Obviously, it's ongoing. It's going to continue to be a challenge, but to sort of think it through a little bit and talk it through with an adult and then talk with the kids.
Yeah, I was
Julie,
gonna build off of that with the idea that like I think naming our emotions to our kids is really helpful, and it shows them that it's okay to feel grossed out and scared and, you know, a range and, you know, sad and all of those things, and using that as a jumping off place. Like, man, this has been really making me bummed, but then kind of letting that sit and not having it be about how bummed and how scared and how freaked out you are, in part because I was saying earlier, like, you don't want to have it feel like a topic that your child doesn't want to bring to you because it becomes about you and your emotions. And obviously, like, we all need our places to process these things. But I do think kind of being like, yeah, this is really freaking me out. How are you doing? You know, so just using it as a leverage or a jumping off point, and then knowing to kind of keep it a little bit closer so that it doesn't become a block then to your child wanting to talk to you about it.
But so like, what do you do? Like, so like last night I was just kind of like, yeah, you know, Epstein, you know, and he was just like, you know, and I was like, have you looked at them? And he's seen them and everything, you know? And I was like, well, shit, you know, and he was just like, yo, what did you think? You think high schoolers like don't, okay. And then he was like, it was crazy. And I just said, yeah, it's disgusting. That's what I said. That was, you know, I said, it's disgusting. And then he said, I don't want to talk about it. And I said, okay, we don't have to right now. And I said, you know, just know that, you know, you're a man and, you know, women look to you to advocate for them. And that was how I left it. So
one of the things that helps me, and this is really just like my parenting perspective, and I guess as an educator too, I can stay regulated with my own feelings if I am aware of what my boundary is, like what I'm asking, what's the behavior I'm asking for from my kid or a child. So for example, my daughter is 15. I don't want her looking at the actual Epstein files. I am aware that she's talking about it, but I know that. And so when I'm feeling like a little bit heated about it, that's actually all I'm trying to impart. And then it's like, why? So the boundary is like, hey, I know people are talking about this. There's some really gnarly stuff in the actual files, and I feel like it's not safe for you to look at them. But it would be different for obviously your son. That's a different relationship, but that's kind of what I do. And it sounds like you already had a little bit of a boundary. So thinking about that, like Cammie was saying with another adult, like what do I want from my kid? Like, what do I not want them to look at something? Do I want them to talk to me about something? Like, does something need to be reported?
For me, it's more him understanding what it means to be a white man in the world. It's way deeper.
That's heavy. Like, that's a big, I'm thinking
I'm
like
going
small.
way deep. I mean, like, to me, this is just like, we can't pretend this shit doesn't exist. I mean, I realize that like we need to do it age appropriately, but
Actually, I think there's something I would maybe use from that in terms of like, this is the biggest and grossest example of a much bigger thing we've seen with Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes and all of this like manosphere space. And so I think there's like a component of it where it's like that conversation of how do you present, how do you avoid deep misogyny on the internet? The kind of two things I would think about is like we talk really explicitly in OWL about managing your inputs, right? Like how much of something can you consume either before you begin believing it or before it totally whacks out your, mental wellness. And so kind of talking about like, wow, it's pretty titillating to get access to things like this. It's hard to look away. Not only are the algorithms designed to keep you in an infinite loop of doom, but also this is particularly, it's hard to not want to look because it's an absolute car crash. So talking a little bit about, hey, this is like a life skill to manage your inputs. And then also kind of, we do a little bit of like scripting out. If someone's saying to you, hey, let's look at this, let's flip through this. Can you role play a little bit of like, what would you say if you didn't want to? And how would you say that to your friends so that they didn't, tell you you're a loser and make you look anyway? So it's like, will your kid want to role play with you? Maybe not, but maybe you could say, hey, if you were me and I were you, what would you want me to say to not get involved in something? So I think there's a little bit of an element of like an opportunity to do some script writing and some kind of preventative language. So your kid has a way to put up their own boundary when they need it. And then also talk a little bit about like their inputs. And if you get into this too deep, it's going to jam you up. Like you're not going to feel good. What can you create instead of consuming? How can we watch Heartstopper as a family? I don't know, like intervening a little bit with something that's not, the manosphere.
but okay.
So I think I would add to that, Marielle, is that I have 2 young men also, and I feel like it's my lifelong job to help them understand that the world is misogynistic and the white men are privileged and all this stuff. That's it, that lesson, you're going to be doing that his whole life.
Sure.
So you don't have to do that all tonight, right?
Yeah.
So maybe make it a longer journey of today we're talking about the Epstein files and how does he feel about it, right? Ask him his feelings. You can go back to him. Hey, the other night, I know I said I was really disturbed about these, but I really kind of was curious how you're feeling about them, right? And just open up a dialogue about it. And don't try to cure all of misogyny in one night.
Yeah, that's
Which
kind
I
of
would
how
love
my
to-
brain works. That's kind of
Yeah,
a
yeah, I know,
ongoing
and-
thing I need to work on.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe again, back to what Julie said was,
Yeah.
write it down, practice it with somebody, your partner, whoever. This is kind of what, or bring a piece of paper. I have brought pieces of paper to my conversations with my kids before, because I'm like, you know what? I really wanted to remember to say these things to you. So
Mhm.
so that's just my other point. Lorraine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi.
I want to share one thing. I want to share this out loud really quickly. I just want to say one thing specifically to Marielle. Something that is centering for me that I think is relevant to everyone is that child sex exploitation, sex trafficking, these crimes, the predatory nature of things are not worse because of the Epstein files. They have always existed.
Oh yeah.
They are a huge problem. And so for me, I just want to put that out there and say, like, I'm not happy about the Epstein files. I'm not happy about it, but this is a really good opportunity to have a conversation with your son that you might not have had before. And it's not like his answer is going to suddenly make the world a worse place. So that's something that's been centering for me. Sorry to interrupt.
I mean, yeah, we talk about systems and shit. I mean, like, that's what we do. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, because Marielle, I feel what you're saying. I have a 15-year-old boy. We've talked a lot about this subject And not just because of the Epstein files, but because of, him being a white male, in general, and just, having privilege and in different ways. And because he's been into YouTube and, different places, and he's fully anti Andrew Tate, anti all of that, right? But it's still there, and it's been there, and he's had access to it for quite a while. But one thing I wanted to say is that he is not a man, he is a child. And it's hard to remember that when they get to be thinking he's gonna be driving next year, like they feel like they're all grown up. But and boys and young men are also victims of predators. And so we've had that conversation. And so it's if that might also help, it's helped me think about it that way, because it is about powerful people hurting children. And there is a gender aspect to it. There is, there's a lot of systems in play there, but, they are children. And then the other thing I just wanted to say was just having this conversation in general is, it isn't necessarily, like, I haven't actually gone, well, I did go once to find files, and it's really hard to find anything. And it's what I think is more prominent and what people are seeing probably more than anything is this batch of files is, if you just open Instagram, you're going to have people stitching, videos of people talking about, like, it's just going to be in your face. I saw something so disturbing, and all I did was open Instagram. So I didn't go searching for files in that moment, and I was just trying to have a nice day, like, I don't know. It was very, very scary. So I think that's another thing, look at their social media, and it's not just, going and specifically seeking these things out.
Thank you for saying that, and like thank you for helping me connect the dots there as well, because thank you. Because you're right, he's a kid that thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Robin W, and I'm gonna maybe ask Cami. I'm sorry, I don't know why I've taken over the moderator. Erin, you can go ahead if you want. About a volunteer at CASA, working with kids that are already come from a trauma background. And my very first advice would be, as if you're a volunteer, please go to whoever's your supervisor and ask them. But Cami, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I'm looking at the question. Yeah, I mean, for folks, kids or adults who have trauma in their background, this can be triggering in perhaps the most unexpected of ways. Like what Lorraine was just describing, of like just opening Instagram and suddenly it's in your face. Or there can be, a memory that brings one too close to the trauma experience. So whatever resources are available. So I'm assuming, the kids in foster care, I hope, have the access to counselors, their court-appointed advocate, their foster parents, hopefully as well, to seek out a, trusted person if they're starting to get triggered by some of the information that they are encountering. And this is true for adults as well. This can bring up a lot of difficult memories in a lot of different contexts. So, it's important to seek out support so that it doesn't get to the point where you feel overwhelmed, or you're feeling desperate, or you're not sure what to do. So I think that's an important thing to remember.
We've also used the fact that we don't know what's going on in the lives of everyone around us as a reason to not make it a big joke. So when, it's a totally developmentally normal thing to start getting really uncomfortable and getting really giggly and making it louder and louder and louder. But we've kind of said, if you're at the lunch table and you're making jokes about Diddy parties and the Epstein files, like, you don't know how that's rippling out to the people around you, or even if the people that you're making the jokes with have a lived experience, that's going to be incredibly hurtful too. So it's been one way we've tried to kind of keep the rails on some of the kind of louder, jokier components.
So one thing I'm going to share, I have like a slight, maybe different framing of that. When I speak to my child about it, our children in our public schools in Oak Park, in middle school and high school, are currently making and have been making jokes about like the Diddy. There's a wide variety of memes and different things. I actually want to go on record and say that I feel a tremendous amount of like resilience and optimism in that. While I do respect and not want, my child to make jokes in ways that traumatize other people, this is also everywhere in our culture right now. And sometimes the like memification and jokes, like they even are singing, there's so much there, right, that I could talk about. Sometimes that's a really, really healthy response to very challenging topics. And I also don't want to burden young people to be like, well, these terrible things are happening and you can't have levity about them and you can't engage with the social media platform about them because you might traumatize someone, because the accountability is 100% on the individuals who are taking these terrible actions. So I just kind of want to like float that out there, because I think that often is a shutdown in the conversation with our young people, because they do make jokes about these things, and that is kind of part of the platform of TikTok and Instagram and social media. So I never want to like put that judgment there, because then I've lost the connection.
But doesn't it matter what like the nature of the jokes are too? I mean,
those are conversations that would be like your values as an individual, right? Like there's things that I might find that are levity that I don't think, right? Like we all have different lines. Some things I feel are harmful and are feeding into broader misogyny. And then there's other things that I think the world is full of some really tough, crazy stuff right now, and some levity is necessary, right? Like there's we all use that all the time. This moment in time is full of sort of absurd things that I never foresaw being part of the public rhetoric. And I think joking about it is a really healthy way to like, this is obscene, right? The things that came out about Diddy, they were obscene. Some of them were memeable. But those are choices that you have a right to make, like as a parent, and then share with your kid. But I wouldn't want to say, because I feel this way and because this is my value, that's the way it is, right? Because you might have a different value than me. My threshold could be completely different than yours.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think it really depends on who you are and the vibe of your family and all of that. I think sometimes making a non-offensive joke is a great communication opener, right, to your youth, and you can use that. But the one thing that I'm always worried about or concerned about imparting to my kids and youth is that it's never, ever, ever the victim's fault, ever. And so if the joke is about that, I'm less likely to be okay with that. So it's just never the victim's fault, ever. So if you can kind of weave those two things together somehow, or I'm not sure how that works, and it would have to be organic in my family. But my kids are in their 20s, so it's a little different.
yeah, I mean, I would think that there are some things that are just unacceptable, but
But I think it also, like, one thing I like to do with, especially with talking to like adolescent boys, because there's that culture often of like, the tougher I am, the meaner I am, the cooler I am, right? And that's part of what, hopefully we're working against in a lot of ways and trying to break. And so one of the phrases I use a lot is like, you can decide what role you want to play now, and you can decide what role you want to play later. And that can evolve and that can change. But it's kind of like with humor, we get to choose where we're punching. And Jamie just popped it in there exactly what the words out of my mouth, the jokes that punch up versus the jokes that punch down. And like, are we making fun of people who got raped, or are we making fun of rapists? Because I'm going to have a real different response to both of those.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard. Like that's like that, and then we can get into like, okay, do we want to talk about being a stand-up comedian? Because that's a whole different, like, you know, that's a choice too. But
Yeah.
I get off topic too much, but it does kind of seg into that question around like a lot of this sensational and conspiratorial content that's circulating. I think is really challenging as a parent now to even, a lot of parents don't know that, like, you know, do we know that these people like Ghislaine Maxwell was the top Reddit contributor and helped like frame the narratives that became a lot of like the manosphere online? Or that like Len Wexler, the guy who's in charge of Victoria's Secret, like was as misogynistic as a lot of people thought, and probably worse, you know? So like there's a lot of this stuff that's like, that's not conspiratorial, that's real, you know?
Yeah.
There's a lot of conspiratorial stuff that's fake about that too. Like, and so like, how do we kind of shift some of those, like, especially if we've got kids who are traumatized or neurodivergent or like at various developmental levels, how do we kind of shape that towards like critical thinking skills rather than like escalating kind of those trauma responses?
Yep. I mean, it's all connected. I mean, that's what's making it so
Let
fucking
me hear from the
overwhelming.
panel, although I love having you contribute. I want to hear from that panel right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
So I want to share
Oh.
that the comprehension like part, I love that you called that out, Erin. The conversation about literacy, I think is very important. I have been sort of part of the crowd that was, so personally, kind of bummed out that so many of the quote conspiracy theories have come true, and that the scope of the problem and network of predatory, powerful people was so large. And certainly with middle school and above, they are having conversations about this in their academic life. They should be talking about systems of power. Where's the source from, right? They are asked to critically look at sources and say, who created the source? What do you think their viewpoint was? And so that's kind of what I think is super helpful to start with. Asking the question is like, I heard this thing, like, why do you think, you can start with something concrete, right? Like Epstein was a criminal. He was operating with a ring of very powerful people who were also committing criminal acts. Why do you think powerful people got away with this for so long? And let them tell you about it, because especially middle schoolers are, I think Julie, you said this earlier, like they're justice minded. They're thinking about this already. So like, let them take the bait and let them hash it out, because they may surprise you with like really astute observations.
I'm going to ask you, I'm going to kind of ask you guys a question, which is, you know, we're talking about the Epstein files, and that's sort of pedophilia and power, abuse of power on a really grand scale, right? But sexual assault, sexual exploitation of kids, girls, boys, trans, whoever, is pretty prevalent in our society. So a lot of that does not happen on this grand scale. So how do we have those, how do we have that conversation, or do we need to have that conversation? I mean, I think we do. How do you keep yourself safe as a youth from, you know, how do we balance those two things? Sorry to be a panelist and asking a question.
I think one of the trickiest things we try to talk about in 8th grade OWL is power dynamics. It's like if you watch the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, which maybe kids don't watch anymore, but like Blake Lively's character absolutely makes out with her coach at a summer camp, and the kids are like, but they're only a couple years apart. So it's like trying to tease out power dynamics and when those come into play and how easily they can come into play, and how as a 15-year-old, you might feel like you are fully adult and fully capable of making the most informed, right decisions for your body and your future in that exact moment. Like, so to me, it's like, maybe I'm just adding on to your question with more questions of like, trying to parse out power dynamics feels like the piece of the puzzle that I'm always trying to like jam in, and maybe not always doing the most elegant job when I'm trying to be like, well, right, like we know a teacher and a student is wrong, but like why would this be wrong with this? And but what if you're 19 and that's not a power dynamic because now you're an adult. So just kind of like constantly workshopping that has been an ongoing kind of part of my facilitator journey, even is trying to figure out how to talk about that.
To piggyback on that, so I think that's an important part of Stephanie's question that Julie answered in terms of thinking about power dynamics and where kids might experience, sexual abuse potentially. But I also think we want to, if we can, use this horribleness to sort of have an opportunity to talk to our kids about being safe on the internet in terms of who's contacting them on social media and how do they know that people are who they say they are on video games or presenting themselves on social media. I'm sure we've heard of horrible stories of things happening in the news, but I think my kids used to talk about how the most random people would contact them on their Instagram, and somehow they were able to detect that it wasn't okay and they could back away from it. But I'm wondering how much kids understand they have to be very cautious about that. And I think some kids just they don't have the same filter that we have as adults who are sort of not native to the internet the way that our kids are. They've always had it in their lives. And so in some ways they maybe trust it more than we do. How can we instill some of that healthy distrust and encourage them to come talk to us if something doesn't feel right about who might approach them, through a social media channel? What do the other panelists think about how to approach that?
So I totally agree with you. I'm feeling called to call out a couple of comments in the chat box, which seem to be coming from a place of maybe trying to set the record straight or being vulnerable. So there's a couple of them. The first one is with males. It's so important to remember that 1 in 6 is a victim and many never confide in anyone. And the second one that's caught my eye is the vast majority are abused by someone the family knows and trusts. So I just want to call out that I see you and I hear you. I think most of the panelists are very invested in preventing child sexual abuse and agree that those are very real, consistent problems. So I just want you to be seen. I saw them and I agree with you. Those are real stats. And then I also want to say that I do think it's easy to conflate kind of what I was saying earlier. Child sexual abuse is not more common because of the Epstein files, right? Like it is a problem. And so it's good to have the dialogue about these things now, but also kind of separate but interconnected topics. Is that fair to say? Do any panelists have anything to say? I feel like there was vulnerability or maybe like something in those chats that needed to be addressed.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with your comments, and thank you for those chats. I think that I'm feeling like this all goes back to that open line of communication with your kids, and with you don't have to have serious conversations every night with your child, but the fact that they know that you're there and you can have these conversations, they can ask you anything, they can tell you anything. What if your kid is one of those 1 in 6, right? It's not their fault. You can come tell me this. I will always tell you it's not your fault and I will always help you. Does that conversation come out of having a conversation about the Epstein files? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry, but I think it could.
I also want to say thanks to the person that popped that in there too, and just to kind of add on that the number is probably really low because of the underreporting, and I know that can be really hard, especially with a lot of the media stuff right now, because it's been very, very heavily gendered. And even though the majority of people who do the assaulting tend to be men, and the majority of people who are assaulted tend to be women, that tends to kind of create really odd dynamics in a bunch of different ways, and doesn't always make it easier to have a lot of these conversations because and this impacts, and I do think it's one of those things that I appreciate about OWL, not to just plug them all the time, but there's that there's a need to kind of continue these conversations and make them really ongoing. and that this is not like in any way like a one and done conversation. This is so much more of just like, how do we have these dialogues, and how do we like normalize creating space for this stuff so that, you know, our kids are coming to us to answer this. And one of the ways I've framed it with my kid, like we're kind of at that interesting age of 13 where I've been like, hey, you know, when you're ready to encounter the worst possible things that people do to each other, that's when we can start talking about social media. And until then, like, you know, you're going to end up encountering it if you get on there. But I think a lot of other, you know, there's a lot of families who are already on there. There's a lot of kids who are already encountering it in one way or another. And that's really tough. Even though it was the 80s, I also read everything Stephen King had written by the time I was like 10 years old, which is arguably worse. So I was, you know, mine was coming from a different source, but it also wasn't, it was like, wait, this is actually traumatizing in hindsight. It explains a lot. But, how we create those healing spaces is a whole different conversation.
And I think that component of the vast majority are abused by someone the family knows or trusts, again, brings the conversation from, you know, 90,000 feet to like, yes, this is private planes and private islands and billions of dollars and all of this stuff. But like, hey, in the real world, this is what we are keeping our eyes on. And this is what I want to have us talking about. And I might not do it elegantly, but if I'm willing to talk to you about this, I'm also willing to talk to you about anything that's bugging you or anything you're seeing or anything that you have questions about. So again, it's like, it's the grossest jumping off point ever, but it could ultimately be a tool that helps us all connect with our kids in ways that we weren't expecting to.
I just want to point out that I know we're kind of saying, talk to your kids, talk to your kids, talk to your kids, have this open line of communication. But I just want to recognize that that's really, really hard, really hard. And I think it was Julie earlier said, practice, you know, take a deep breath and say the words. How do you feel about the Epstein files? Take a deep breath and say, you know, what are kids talking about around pedophilia at school, whatever that hard thing is. And you might get it wrong, but you're not going to do any damage. So you're not going to get it wrong. You might not be eloquent, but you're not going to get it wrong. So I appreciate the difficulty in doing all of this. One little tip, when my kids were young and I was an OWL teacher, back then, I would leave the OWL books sitting around my house, and they would like, I'd periodically see them picking them up and reading them, and I'd be like, hey, have any questions about that? It was great. So if you have like material that you just by mistake leave sitting around your house, it's not the most reliable method, but you know, might work. So go for it.
I also love doing the little trick of we're just going to watch this video real quick, and then we'll have ice cream right after that, and just kind of sandwiching in like a little bit of like, because you can go on YouTube and find, you know, there, like, in addition to the conspiratorial stuff, there is some really well produced informative things, and then it makes it a little bit easier to talk about the video you just saw, not necessarily like stare at each other deep in the eyes and get all intense, because that can be a lot harder. And sometimes it's easier to just kind of make it about those other people on the screen and not necessarily about us. But both are important too.
That, and I want to offer up that something you just said, this is a real conversation that I had with my child and others, is like, when we talk about like the 90,000 view of Epstein and the magnitude of that issue, and then zoom into the sort of smaller local, like, I'm actually scared that my child might be victimized. One thing that was really great was chatting about, like, it's kind of crazy how many victims like these people were able to access. Like, how do you think that happens? How are you a 14-year-old girl and you give a person a phone number? Like, what are the predatory behaviors? Like, how do you think that happens? It can't just have been the one kid, because there's like, it was a lot of them. And that conversation, I know that it's really scary, but it's also a very real conversation to then be like, yeah, like, there's all kinds of reasons why, like, you shouldn't be talking to grownups out on the street, and like all those small micro things that we all know as adults, but are kind of hard to like splice into a conversation because they're very abstract and you don't want to frighten your child, right? But if they're in middle school and they're talking about Epstein, you've got an in to now talk about safety for them. And to the commenter who said like it's often someone they know and trust, like, yeah, like these are networks of people that created relationships with kids. And so it's, to echo what Stephanie said, like you're not going to get it wrong because you say those concrete, like real facts, and then find out what your kid knows and how they feel about it.
I really like the idea that we don't have to stick the landing. This was in relation, a friend told me this years ago. He was trying to tell his kids he was gay, and he was like, I thought I had to have the conversation with them. And his therapist was like, oh no, you're just having a conversation with them. And I think there's a similar component to like, we view all of these conversations as so high stakes, but they're all, Erin was saying this beautifully earlier, like it's one of 1,000 conversations. And the less kind of stress you put on yourself to make this one thing perfect, the more likely it is to feel natural, to happen again, to say to your kid, wow, I really bungled the way I wanted to say this last time. I'm going to try again. Like we're also just modeling how to human to them in so many ways. So that I lean into I don't have to stick the landing thing all the time, like every day.
I think sometimes we want to say the right thing and convey our values to our kids. And sometimes it's helpful to sort of, I've heard it described as sort of act like a potted plant. Like you're just there, taking it in, not reacting, and sort of absorbing what you're hearing so that your child feels comfortable, like actually sharing. Like if you sort of take on the responsibility for carrying the conversation, it makes it too easy for them to be quiet. So just sort of be there and see if that maybe encourages them to, fill the silence with what they think.
That's a really good point. And how do you kind of like what along those lines, like what signals should parents be paying attention to, like in their kids, to kind of be able to recognize when like maybe it's time to seek additional help or get more outside support, or just even if the kid's not necessarily showing as much distress as kind of is under the surface?
Yeah, I don't know who said this, but I think your kid well, so if something feels off, you should definitely sort of trust your gut. But some sort of general signs that people talk about is if your child, is having like a behavior change of any kind. So like now they're having nightmares and they never used to have nightmares, or they're talking about having difficulty sleeping or change in eating habits, or, tearfulness. Although, my daughter, when she was 13, she would have incredible bouts of PMS and I would feel like the world's worst parent. And I'd be like, oh, now I know why. It's that time of the month. It's okay. She'll be okay in a week or so. But to just sort of notice changes and sort of, again, open-ended, ask your kid, I've noticed, it seems like you've been having a hard time sleeping. What's going on? So those kinds of things, sleep disruption, changes in eating habits, tearfulness, but your kid.
Yeah, and that's hard.
I would also like to shout out and plug that our school district here in Oak Park, both D97 and D200, have many professionals in the school building that you are welcome to tap into. The social workers have been pretty phenomenal. So you can also tell your child that if they have like a really scary situation or something that triggers them in the school, I have found that those professionals are great for crisis management and then directing you to resources. So plugging that too.
Good call. I also forgot the name of that organization that does a lot of teen support groups too.
I will say that the township, Oak Park Township, also has some really fantastic free mental health counseling services for young people. And it is very accessible, and they are plugged in with the social workers at the schools. So then that's really helpful. And I think the township will direct you to some of those groups, but off the top of my head, Erin, I can't remember like if there's a phone number. I just know that I personally have called them, and they will offer you all kinds of crisis and mental health resources locally. Definitely more on the side of like crisis management, but they've been great.
And NAMI is a good resource too. I'm going to look and see if I can find the one I was thinking of that pops in my head. But what other, yeah, I feel like we need like a parent support group in addition to the teen support groups, but yeah.
I want to piggyback on what you said. One of the hardest journeys for me as a parent has been finding like-minded parents that I'm allowed to have the role-playing conversations with, because I absolutely need to talk things through with other adults. So I think that's vital.
What else should we cover? Is there a, yeah.
So that makes me want to ask a question in terms of how we navigate our kids' friends and their parents. And if we have a boundary we've set and another parent is like, no, I think we should all read the Epstein files at dinner every night together because that's how we're going to avoid things. Or if you set I don't know if it's boundary, if you set a expectation of like, you can ask me hard things, and if your friend is standing there, I might still answer it. How do we navigate the unlike-minded parents? I'm curious how someone tell me what to do.
I think that's a good opportunity to model, right?
They also probably cringe when I walk because I have the conversations and I send the texts and I make the phone calls, and they're probably like, this woman.
I think that's an opportunity. If someone doesn't think about it in the same way, we can model, how we have these difficult conversations and can, be polite and respectful and show decorum. What a concept. And be, thoughtful about what the other person has to say and really listen and, show our kids that it is possible to do that.
And I would imagine that each of the other panelists has had the experience that as an OWL facilitator, other people's children will ask you you become a safe adult and will sometimes disclose things and ask some big questions. And I always have the impulse to I tell the child and also their parent, like, hey, your parent's actually a really great resource. So your kids are searching for people to talk to about it. And sometimes it has to be not the parent. I think there is also like building out a safe network is super healthy because I don't always want to talk to the same people about stuff. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the idea of like, sometimes our kids don't open up to us, but they'll open up to somebody else, and maybe kind of workshopping with your kids. Hey, if there's something, and this is also, we talk about this about drinking. We talk about this about, unexpected pregnancies at home or with friends. That was phrased poorly. But the idea that like, if there is something that you can come to me with anything, but if you are too scared or too nervous or think I'm going to be grossed out or think I can't handle it, here's a bunch of other names of people that here are their phone numbers. They know you might text them at any time. I think it's important to give the other trusted adults a heads up so that they're not just getting hey, what do you think about the Epstein files text at 10 o'clock at night? But I think kind of making sure your kid has resources that are both, internet sources that you think are valid, but also human sources for that kind of in-person contact of people that are informed, share the same values you do, and are willing to dig in with your kid and sit in the mess with them.
To piggyback on that, we've been finding, and I don't know if this is true of the middle school kids, maybe true of high school kids and certainly college kids, not being comfortable talking to people about these things, so talking to AI about it. And AI are not the people that we want to be sort of sharing our feelings and expecting an appropriate, comforting, empathic response. So I would, I'll go out on a limb here, not really, and sort of assert that really discourage your kids from relying on AI as a therapist. It's, there's all kinds of problems that AI is bringing up for us, but they're not the folks to talk to, even though that feels safer sometimes than talking to real humans about it. So be aware that that might be happening.
Someone disclosed to me yesterday that they use ChatGPT as a coach / therapist, an adult.
Yeah. It's not the place to go. It really isn't.
No, but good call out.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a really critical part of that media literacy piece. And I was showing my kid how it couldn't handle a word problem in math and how easy it was for it to get some really simple things wrong. And she was like, wait, what? But yeah, if you can't count the number of R's in the word strawberry, you probably shouldn't be a therapist. So, I mean, I guess you don't need good grammar to be a therapist. Maybe I'm being too judgy, but yeah, AI not good for that, for sure.
One of the science teachers at the middle school assigned a really fantastic AI project that I thought a parent could also assign, which is give them a specific research question and ask AI to answer it, and then have them do the actual resource with real primary sources and see how wrong AI is. So, and it was very funny. It was amusing.
Yeah, we were laughing about how like AI is like having a friend who's wrong about 20% of the time, but super, super confident all the time, and how that can be really dangerous and helpful, but not always accurate. But yeah, but thanks for being here, everybody. Thanks for helping make our community better.
Thanks for putting this together, Erin.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for being on our panel. Awesome panelists. Yay.
Yes.
And thanks for all the help, Nina. As you get off mute or get off your, the camera real quick. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody. Thanks again.